let's take a look behind the curtain at the dark arts of mastering a song. What I'm about to show you, I'll probably have to kill you after. But seriously, let's talk about mastering and what it means. Mastering is the final step in the recording process. It is also a lot of responsibility for the mastering engineer. And what I mean by that is you have an artist who spent lots of time and potentially lots of money putting their song together, tracking their song, editing it, mixing it, and now it's come to you for the final step of mastering. One thing I've come to learn over the years of mastering songs for people is to not go too far. So you should keep your processing fairly subtle where possible. And if you think that the mix needs some help, it might be best to suggest that they go back and make some changes and then get a new mix sent to you. But in the end, it's their creative vision and you don't want to change that too much. What you want to do is be a fresh set of ears to be able to make adjustments to what their ears can no longer hear. So any problem frequencies, if the track sounds too dull, brightening it up. If it's too bright, warming it up, all these kinds of things. And of course, making the track loud for release. Now, this can be a sensitive subject for some people.
But this is very dark stuff, very dark indeed.
Now, save your hate mail because what I'm about to say will probably stir a few people up. But unfortunately, the loudness wars lives on and loud masters are still the king of the game. And what I mean by that is do not master your track to minus 14 LUFS. We've already been through this. This is one of my first videos I made, was having a bit of a vent about minus 14 LUFS. And as we all know, this has pretty much been debunked now, but there was a time when there was a lot of people online preaching that you have to master your songs to minus 14 LUFS because that's Spotify's playback, and that's all it is. It's Spotify's playback. So you don't need to worry about that. But what you need to worry about is, does your track hold up against the big boys? Because when you download a track off of the iTunes Store or Google Play or wherever you get your music from, you'll find that all of the stuff that is actually being put out by labels and the big guys, it's still loud. So I would say that the typical range for a master is between -9 to -5 LUFS. You know, that's kind of like in that area is kind of the sweet spot. And for me, I typically try and push my tracks to be around -7. So that's kind of like where I find a sweet spot, between -7, -6, if the track can handle it. Obviously, if you're pushing a track and it's not liking it, then you should back it off. You should always go for quality over loudness. But the thing is, you still need to try and get your tracks as loud as you can without destroying them. So we're going to cover that in this. So I'm going to show you some of the steps I use in mastering to try and get my tracks a little bit louder without destroying them. So I know that was a long-winded intro, but I felt like it was worth discussing this stuff. Now, let's dive into the actual mastering side of things here. So let me show you a quick before and after that's level matched, so you can hear the processing that's been done, and you can also hear how the track is still sounding great, even though I've pushed it quite hard to get it nice and loud. So you can hear the master is a little bit more exciting and a little bit more glued sounding, and the whole track's just holding together really nicely. And we've still got that nice low end punch and a nice snappy clean top end, and the mid-range is a bit cleaner, but the mix is also feeling a little bit wider. So let me show you the processing that I've done to kind of get to this point, and then at the end we'll compare the actual volume differences so you can hear how much louder this is when we're not actually level matching it. So the first thing I've put on here is the SSL Vintage Drive plugin. So just looking to add a little bit of like saturation to the track, and that's just going to give us a little bit more room to push the loudness, and it's just going to glue the track a little bit nicer, especially with those kind of like pokey transients of the drums. It's going to just kind of round this out a little bit. So we're pretty much just going 12 o'clock with the drive and the density, and only a 20% mix here. So it's going to be subtle. Just adds a little bit of thickness to it. So again, with mastering, keeping it subtle, and all these little steps that we do, they add up to the big picture at the end. And while we're going, guys, make sure you hit that like button. Definitely subscribe to the channel. I'm posting videos all the time. So if you enjoy this content, make sure you do that so you can check out the videos when I post them. Make sure you turn on that notification bell so you know when they get dropped. Now, the next thing we're going to do is tackle a little bit of EQ. So we've got Pro Q3 here. And basically what I was trying to do here is kill any problem frequencies that I was hearing. So my ears were gravitating towards the mid-range where there's sort of like some paddish guitars and a little bit of like build-up that I was hearing around 600 hertz. So we got 599 hertz here, but basically 600 hertz region. I'll boost it up and show you what I was hearing and why I wanted to cut this. So you can hear it's a bit of a yucky frequency range and it's just clouding up the vocals, and by cutting that a little bit more, it actually helped the vocal to stand out a little bit better. And we're only doing about 2.11 dBs cut. The other thing was a droning frequency at 326 hertz. So just these things were just standing out to me, like kind of muddying up the mix. So a little cut there, we've got minus 3 dB cut there. And then over here around 3.8K, a little bit of like presence in the vocals that were just sounding a little bit harsh to me. So we've gone like the dynamic EQ here to kind of just duck it whenever the spikes in the voice come through. So you can hear on some words when she starts to push it, that frequency really comes through. And so that dynamic EQ is just kind of sucking down on that in that moment and just tames it a little bit. So we've got about minus 3 dB there on that. And then we have a little cut here at 3.6K, a 2 dB cut. And that was just another like resonant frequency that was just bothering me. And that's just because there's that little bit of presence that was jumping out there. So just a small cut there just helped to rein that in a little bit. And that's pretty much all the EQ I did on this track because the mix sounds pretty solid. So I'm not looking to change it dramatically. I just wanted to fix anything that was sort of sounding a bit out of place, harsh or muddy to me. And I feel like the balance is pretty nice already. And so that's just given it a nice tidy up. So you can hear that cleans it up nicely. The next thing we've got is the SSL Fusion Violet. Now I added this later on when I was mastering, but I came back and I put it lower down in the chain. This is just a 1 dB cut at 50 hertz as I felt the subby region of the track was getting a little bit too pronounced. And sometimes that happens when you start to push it into a limiter and get louder. The low end starts to like get a little bit away and gets a bit bloated. So we've just done a little cut to kind of compensate for that. Just makes the low end a little bit tighter sounding. The next thing we have is our Fusion Transformer. Basically just putting the shine at 100%, amount 100%, the low frequency extension button turned on, and then about 20% mix on this. So it's subtle, but it's adding a little bit of airiness to the top end with the transformer. That low frequency extension button is also making the low end feel deeper. Even though it's not really pronouncing it, it must do some kind of cut in the upper lower frequencies to make the low end feel deeper. That's kind of what I think is going on there, but I don't really know what's happening in the background of the plugin. But it does something really nice and pleasing to the low end by having that turned on. But also having that mix knob dialed back just keeps it from getting out of control. We only want a little bit of this excitement to the top end and the low end of our mix. This is already a bass heavy kind of track. Next up, you can sense a bit of a theme going on here. We've got the Fusion plugins all across this master. So got some high frequency compression. So sometimes it's cool to have any kind of high end boost into a high frequency compressor. That way it doesn't get out of control and can actually make it sound a lot smoother. So we're just sitting at around 11 kilohertz and just kind of catching a few little peaks that come through. So you can hear it just smooths the top end out in a really pleasing way. Okay, following up from that one, we've got the SSL Fusion stereo image. Now, we're not doing too much here. We just got a 1.2 dB boost to our width, keeping it subtle. When you boost width on a master too much, the whole thing just falls apart. So if you're going to do a little bit of this, just do a little bit of this, okay? So it's subtle, and you can hear when I boosted it just then to kind of demonstrate. It sounds pretty bad once you start to get past +2 on here. I mean, it obviously depends on the mix. This mix already has a lot of spatial stuff going on. It sounds nice and wide already. And by boosting that, all we're doing is bringing out reverb and stuff that's starting to clutter the mix. So a little bit sounds great. Too much sounds bad. Getting close to the end here. Let's have a listen to before and after with the processing we have so far, and then we're gonna get into the making the track loud part. So I'm liking what I'm hearing. We've kind of just cleaned it up a little bit. It's a little bit more exciting. And now let's get into the next step where we're going to get this nice and loud. So the first thing we're going to do is have K clip, a tiny little bit of clipping, and we just have it on the smooth mode, and we're softening it at about 35%. So it's not a hard clip, it's sort of like a soft clip. Usually I'm just aiming for like 1 or 2 dBs of clipping, and that's usually just to tame any like stray kicks or snares. So you can see not much there, half a dB. And that's just going to give us an extra half a dB to push this into our limiter. So then we're following up K-Clip with Ozone. I've got Ozone 9, and I'll run you through what's going on here. So we've got nothing going on in EQ, but we've got some multi-band compression on that low end. So just kind of tame that kick a little bit. And we've got the parallel compression around 51%. So you can see that number down there. It's hitting like half a dB, 1 dB. So it's not doing heaps, but it's just controlling it a little bit. Then we're just following that up with a little bit of dynamic EQ, which is just reining in on some problematic frequencies and just kind of smoothing the track out a little bit. So we've got 222 hertz, and this is a pretty like common problem area for a bit of muddiness in your mix. 685 hertz in that muddy region I was talking about before, where we did a little bit of a cut. So a little bit more dynamic EQ here just to kind of like control that even more. And then dealing with some harshness up around 5K, a little bit more smoothing on the top end with a high shelf at 12K. And these are all just dynamic bands. So you can hear it's just warming it up a bit, sort of pushing it on these high frequencies a little bit more than the lower stuff, and it's just warming the track up and dealing with any of this muddiness down here as well. Now, the last thing on here, we've got the maximizer. Now, we're not using the maximizer to get our final volume, although it is helping. What we're doing here is shaving off a couple of dBs on the track, and then we're going to push this into our final limiter. Now, we've got it in mode 4 on classic. I find the classic mode is pretty good on like a kind of fairly balanced track. If anything, it adds a little bit of warmth, whereas like the modern seems to add a little bit of a low end bump and a bit of like a top end to it, and the transient mode makes everything really punchy. And so if your mix is already punchy and balanced, then the classic mode seems to sound the best to me. And there you go. So we're just getting a couple of extra dBs of gain reduction here. We don't have true peak turned on. The character is kind of like the release on this. If you have it too fast, you get a lot of artifacts. If you have it too slow, you don't get the loudness. So generally I'm kind of like 0.8 to 1.2 is kind of like a sweet spot, I reckon, on this. Just pushing a little bit of transient here and a little bit of transient emphasis here. And that's all that's going on there. So you can hear it sounds a little bit tighter now after those couple of steps. So we're tightening the low end a bit, tighten up on some of these frequencies with the dynamic EQ, giving the track a little bit of a squeeze. But you can hear the dynamics remain pretty consistent even when we hit that bypass button. Now the final step, we're gonna hit Pro L2 with a couple more dBs of gain reduction to get our final volume. Now, this is where I guess you might need to turn down your listening device because we're gonna crank this up. So we're at 10.6 dB. So let's take this down to 0 and then we'll push it up to 10.6 and you'll get to hear kind of where we're sitting. We've got the output at -1 and we've got 8 times oversampling and true peak limiting turned on. And so -1 true peak limiting, pretty much the standard for streaming services. I mean, you can probably get away without true peak if you really wanted to. At least that -1 dB ceiling is pretty important when it comes to the conversion from your WAV file into streaming, because once it converts, it then makes peaks again. And if your ceiling is too high, those peaks get chopped off and digitally clip and it sounds pretty nasty. So we've got it on the all-round style. All these styles have basically different EQs, really, because when you change between them, you either get more low end, you either get a brighter top end, you get better dynamics. There's so many variations here, and I went through them all. I felt that the all-round worked the best for this track. And that's pretty much the process that I used on this particular track. And now the disclaimer here is pretty much every song you master is going to be different. So you can't really take this formula and use it on every track because it's definitely not going to work on every track. You can definitely take that final step where you stack some limiters and clippers to get loudness, but depending on the track and how it's mixed, this might not even work either. Sometimes just having a single limiter where you push it a bit harder actually sounds better than stacking. So you kind of just have to play around with that stuff and figure out what works best for the track that you are mastering. You can see all the steps I took were all pretty subtle and they all stack up to making sure the track sounds nice and not let it get kind of like muddy and mushy once it hits the limiter. So we've definitely made the master louder, more exciting, and we've cleaned up any problems in that mix. So it's going to be a little bit punchier and sound better across a bunch of systems. So I feel like we've kept it true as well to the original mix. So we haven't changed it dramatically, we've just enhanced it. Thanks for checking the video out, guys. If you're interested in watching a full mix tutorial, I take you from start to finish, and check out this next video.